Bé, molt bona tarda, good afternoon to everybody. As we have already said several times, we try in these sessions to tackle the most interesting issues that affect us all. And there are three issues that were raised by Harari in his not last book, but the previous one. And one of the three threads of humanity today is what are gathering us today, this afternoon. For that, remember that these kind of sessions, we have one in English today. Next one will be in 2 weeks, that will be in Catalan on over medication. And what these meetings are organized by the hub, Barcelona hub of the European Academy, and this academy is quite active here doing that and several other issues, thanks to the help of other people, other institutions that are aiding us, including the Catalan government, the municipality, and we are here thanks to also to the RACAP, to the Royal Academy of Arts and Science of Barcelona, which they have this wonderful setting that we are now enjoying. Don't miss when going out to look at the clocks there. So this is one of the most amazing collections of clocks existing. Okay, so today we have this issue of the ecological collapse as one of the three main threats of humanity. The other two will be in the other sessions. One is the threat that will be posed by the nuclear war, and the third one, the threats that are difficult to see, but the threats that will exist because of the artificial intelligence. Today, we are talking on ecology, we are talking on our planet, and I'm delighted to give the word to a full professor of ecology at the University of Barcelona, Cristina, and she is the person that is going to set the floor for the two speakers, and she will handle the session. Thank you very much, Cristina.
Okay, yeah, I think that, yes. Okay. Thank you first for inviting me to moderate this interesting and timely debate about ecological collapse. So I'm an ecologist, and I want to give you my perspective of what is the key issues of this issue, and I think that Ricard and Humbert will provide some nice aspects and very interesting aspects to discuss after that. First of all, Jaume said that the climate change, well, the ecological collapse, no, the climate change is one of the threats of for our planet. I will say that it's both, no, ecological climate change and biodiversity loss, because they are very connected, both of them. So I think that it's important to put this great ecological crisis that we have faced now with unprecedented consequence for the humanity. But in fact, we are the cause of this threat. No, human activities are pushing the ecosystems, are causing a negative footprint, no? That the titles of the session says. That, for example, we are faced now to this new geological or geological age that some colleagues, some authors like Paul say that Anthropocene. No, this is to make sure that humans are causing all these threats that we are faced now. And the other thing that it's important, I think, that to bring here is the fact that in a very recent science paper, I think that was published last year, so that the authors say that we are crossing 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, that are these mechanism processes that maintaining the integrity of the Earth as a world system. So we are faced every year, every time, in a very short scale. We are putting the Earth as a world ecosystem in a really dangerous space for the humanity. So we have to face that this is the context that we face now in our times. Another thing that it's really interesting, for example, from ecology, but also for social systems, are that the people usually think that the change comes gradually, but most of the times change comes abrupt, no? And we face to what we know tipping points, no? That we cross to not return points, and then we face to regime shifts in ecological but also in social systems, and then we face to the collapse. The question here is now if we are able to reverse this collapse. And if we have time, no, there are a lot of scientific researchers focusing on working on early warming signals to advert of these tipping points. But it's true that times go so fast that most of the systems, in most of ecosystems, we are faced to these regime shifts. So we have to work together to try to understand or to advance before to arrive to them. For example, no, some people say that, for example, it's easy not to save the banks because the political governments put money, no, to save the banks. But what happens with ecological systems? It's not so easy to put the natural capital that we need to revert them. So I think that in this context is very necessary to think that what we can do it, no? But this is the very pessimistic way, no? We are faced to collapse, but another part, no? Ecologists have a lot of evidence that ecosystems are more resilient than we thought previously. So they are bring us borrowed time to act. So I think that this is a positive way to think and to go further. Given that climate change and this threat is not only ecological problem, it's that a social and political problem. I think that only the way to achieve some solutions is through the holistic and creative approach. So we have to bring all the disciplines to work together, from physics to biology, to ecology, but also to social science, such as economics. So I think that it's the way to go. But in other way, it's surprising that in a global world with global problems, we are every time more specialized, no? I'm teacher at the university, and it's true that we have not courses and signatures that cross disciplines because we teach very specialist issue, and we need to bring about all the disciplines together. And I think that this session is really nice because we will have the two speakers. In one side, the first speaker will be Humbert Llavadó, that is economist. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of California. He's professor of economics at the University of Pompeu Fabra, an affiliate professor at the Barcelona School of Economics and the Center of Studies on Planetary Wellbeing. Basically, he mainly works on the economics of climate change, political economy, and welfare economy. So he will bring here the idea from the social science. And he has wrote many chapters of books and articles, and I think that it's nice to highlight this sustainability in a warming planet that he wrote with other collaborators, and she has the floor, no? She will have the floor to explain this from social science. On the other way, no? After Humbert, we will have Ricard Soler. He holds a PhD in physics from the University Polytechnic of Catalonia, and he's currently a career researcher at the University of Pompeu Fabra. Also, he is external professor at the Santa Fe Institute and the Vienna Complexity Hub. His work leading the complex system laboratory have been oriented towards the research to the universal laws to explain or to understand the dynamics of complex systems, from mathematical models and synthetic biology experiments that he will explain in a little bit later. So thanks. I will give the floor to Humbert. I have to say before that we will have the two presentations, and after that you will have the opportunity to ask here in the room, but also the people in the Zoom session can write the questions for both speakers. So thank you to all to have you, and you are welcome.
How? Working? No. Okay. First of all, let me thank the academia and Jaume for the invitation to talk in these talks, these conversations, these dialogues that are very interesting and very, I think, bring really top topics to the floor. When I received the invitation, let me start here because to make the introduction. So when I received the invitation, the first thing I thought is, how can I bring a topic that it's optimistic? Okay, so the title is a title fairly pessimistic. When we talk about climate change, everything we think of is the picture of the polar bear who's alone. They are drifting in the ocean, and thinking about an optimistic view. What I thought is I would bring something that is happening right now in economics, at the risk of being a talk that it's a little bit academic. I think some problem with the sound. With the no, it's mine. No, okay. That it's about how to measure climate change economic impacts. So how to measure the economic impacts of climate change? It's been defined as the thorniest issue in climate change economics. This is by William Nordhaus, Nobel Prize, who's on these type of topics. And let me just put this disclaimer of saying I'm gonna talk about many things that are being discussed right now in economics, so they are not settled issues. And let's start from a consistent disparity that has existed for many years between economics and the climate scientists. And it's the description of what are the impacts of climate change. So if you read the descriptions, let's go, and this is a graph. So I cannot point here, but this is a graph from the latest assessment report of the IPCC. If you see this type of description, what could be the impact of having 3 degrees, even 2, but 3 or 4 degrees, it's going to be a catastrophic impact. So the description is close to what we could think the end of the world. Now, if you look at the functions, the way, the economic impact that has been used in most of the macroeconomic models is like the function you see here, so that tells you what's going to be the loss in GDP. So because we are measuring economic impact, the loss of GDP of different degrees. So if you see that 2-3 degrees, they have a very small impact. So it's a 3% 2-3% change of GDP. 2-3% of change of GDP is not insignificant. You can think of what could be the impact. It's similar to the impact of the financial crisis of 2018, but it's very far from the description of this apocalyptic world that we see in the from the climate scientists. So economists have been sensitive to this issue. There's been a lot of discussion. So there are here just a couple of references. Hill and who already in 2017 they were talking about this, saying that there was a big disparity, but nothing really moved about it except what we are gonna talk, or what I want to talk now. So there has been, so most of this analysis of this relationship between the economic impact and the change in temperature, they were based on three classic models. That one is the model of Nordhaus, DICE, the other one is the model of Richard Toll, that it's found, and the other one it's a model. So the page model of Chris Hope, that it's the one behind the Stern report, for those who know about them. But since these models, and this is the bars that you see in colors, there have been an explosion in the analysis, in the study of what are the impacts of climate change, and in particular the economic impacts of climate change. So this explosion of research has come from having better data, having better econometrics, that is the statistics, in order to determine these relationships between the impacts of changes in temperature, or impacts in climate change, and changes in the GDP. A more inclusive approach that introduces not only changes in temperature, but other type of changes, like changes also in extreme events, and changes in rain, and changes in the level of the sea rise. And I think, importantly, a new generation of economists who have built with the sensitivity to think about climate change and start talking about this. So the first, so the three novelties that has brought this discussion, one is that I'm gonna talk about. One is the distinction between level and growth effects. The second is the distinction between persistent and permanent growth effects. And the final and very recent introduction is the idea of using global or local temperatures. As such, they look very abstract, but I'll show you that they have very, very relevant impacts in the measures. So the first one, it was already in 2015. It was a paper published in Nature that has a huge impact because it found a very different results from these 2%. So in particular, what they found is that the global impact, rather than being 2-3%, so the global impact would be in the order of 25% of GDP. This is catastrophic, in a sense. So how do they reach this conclusion? So what did they introduce new? Well, what they introduced was the idea that climate impact are non-linear. That was something included. It's something that was already in the literature, but most prominently, the idea that the effect of the changes in temperature and the changes in climate were not effect in reducing what's the GDP, but reducing the growth path, reducing what's the rate at which the GDP changes, at which the economy grows. A change in the growth, it has in the short term the difference between a level and between a level and a growth effect is very small, but as we move in time, then this change starts increasing, and it produces, when we talk about 80 years in the future, a big disparity between one impact and the other, and we go from this 2 to this 25%. Not only they found this result, but they found that 5% in their estimations, 5% of the countries, of the poor countries or 5% of the countries in the world among the poorest countries, they would be even poorer than they are today, only because of climate change. So we have so this type of analysis try to isolate all other type of impacts. 76% of the countries will be affected by the climate change, and the 40% poorest countries will suffer not a 25%, but a 75% loss of GDP. So this is under SSP5, so here we are talking changes in temperature around 4 degrees, more or less. Okay. Now, they also found that the richest countries could be slightly affected. So this is mostly, if you look at the map, so the blue area are the countries that are affected the least. This is basically because many of the rich countries, they live in a cold weather, and warming the weather, it could have positive impact. Okay. So this paper entered. It was so up here. It created a lot of debate, and it didn't have a lot of impact, especially because the result was a little bit too stark. So they were too extreme, and they had some issues like countries losing almost 100% of their income, and more surprisingly, other countries doubling or increasing their income several folds because of climate change, especially if you think about Nordic countries, which was difficult to explain. So the next step in this process was the idea of qualifying this analysis by distinguishing between level effect. This was the traditional way of measuring the impact of climate change. The permanent growth effect, this is what we just saw in Berkshire and Miguel, and the idea that there will be effects in the growth rate, and this is this new paper. So there will be effects in the growth rate, but this effect will last for a certain period and then will revert back. So it will have persistent but not permanent growth on GDP. So basically, if we have, you have to a pulse function. If we increase the temperature in 1 degree, the path of growth of the economy will slow down or will decrease. Over time, it will go back. There will be kind of reverse to the standard, the path prior to the shock. So there could be a recovery path. So if you want to, I think I can talk about it. So if you want to see, forget about all the math, but what the graph shows is this idea. You see in the top graph, the green line. I think it's green, yeah. So the green line, this could be the level effect. So it just goes down and then it goes back in the next period because it has a one-time effect. The permanent growth effect is the red line. It goes down and stays down forever. So what this other analysis, and there is all the econometrics and the analysis of the data behind it shows, is that it really goes down, and then there is this slow recovering back to the previous situation. In terms of growth, what could happen, and that you can see it on the bottom graph, what happens is that there is a declining growth because of this climate change, and that would be the difference between the green and the yellow, but the difference between the red, the green, and the yellow, when we go to many periods in the future, by the end of the century, is not as large as we had in the previous case. Okay, so this results into something that it's so we don't get the 2% increase in the 2% loss of GDP. We don't get the 25% loss of GDP, but we get around 12% loss of GDP because still is a big change. Okay, so if you want to see a little bit what's the relevance of all this data, so here you can see the difference between what could be the pure level climate change. So this is the red, almost horizontal line at the top with this very small impact that actually it doesn't pay off, it's not enough to compensate the mitigation costs under a low emissions that are reflected here by the green line. Okay? Now, that's very different from the pure growth or the persistent growth effects that are the other two lines. Even the persistent growth effect, it could already more than compensate to invest in the mitigation of emissions and eliminate from a pure cost-benefit analysis. Okay, so this to this discussion there is a third analysis that is still at the working paper stage. It's still in debate in the economy, and this analysis of Bilal and Kansik that I think it's very promising, and it really brings something into the discussion that it's very relevant. And what they do is they say, well, when we want to change, when we want to find what are the changes, the impact of changes in temperature, let's focus only in temperature, changes in temperature on GDP, we don't have to look at local temperature, that's what's been used in the past, we have to look at global temperature. So why global temperature? Because, and that's what I'll show in a second, because this global temperature is bringing in the idea of extreme effects that we don't see in local temperature. Okay? So with this, they find this much larger climate change impact that increases in 1 degree. It already reduces the GDP. So the economic impact it will be around 12% loss at the peak, and it will last a long time. After 10 years, the impact of this increase in temperature will still last there. And as I said, so the argument is that when we look at this global mean temperature variation, because that's what we exploit, instead of the local variation, we capture, let me just show it here, so we capture much better what are the impacts of these extreme events, like extreme heat, extreme precipitation, or extreme wind. So while the red and the black, they are similar in the first graph where we look at local temperature, the impact, how local temperature affects. So there is no lot of difference between them. The red impacts, the red line that it's reflecting the impact when we take in consideration only local temperature, it's very different, doesn't take into account the effect of this extreme effect. So for what it matters here, what is relevant is that now, with this measure, we'll have a much bigger impact. We have, and I'll show you in a second, a huge impact of climate change that should be introduced in the models. So why it's important, these differences in the impact, in the economic impact of climate change? We know that economic impact are not the impact, not all the impacts. We know that there are many things that are not considered, but whether we like it or not, the economic impact of climate change are being used in cost-benefit analysis, they are used in policy making, they are used in investment decisions, and they are used even in litigation by activist groups. When they bring a litigation to court, what they bring is actual damage that it's based on this type of models. So this change in the estimation and in the way of calculating, and these new calculations of climate change, it will have, at least I hope, very relevant aspect. Just to give you an example, so one thing that it's used in order to estimate what is the cost of 1 ton of CO2, of emitting 1 ton of CO2, and this is the social cost of carbon, which is what is the damage that it will make for all the generations when you emit it, because what will be the impact on climate change in the future. So the Obama administration, they made the calculation, they used a discount, and they end up with an amount of $50. Using the 3% discount, where it's another topic that I have a lot of research about, but I'm not gonna cover here. Trump actually reduced this cost of emitting 1 ton of CO2 to $1 or $8, basically by two things. One is discounting what is the impact in the future. So if we take into consideration that the future matters less, and that's basically what this 7% does, so we discount more what is happening in the future, and basically by saying the only cost I care, by reducing the cost, the only cost I care are domestic cost. Biden went back to the Obama approach. It considered all the impact to the American economy, both domestic and abroad. The new estimation by the Environmental Protection Agency, it goes from these $50 to $100. And basically what we do is by taking into consideration not only the impact to the American economy or the economy of the United States, domestic and abroad, but also the impact, all the global impact that will have these emissions of CO2. So this $190 is already a big jump from what we had before. There is a lot of discussions about this. If we look at the latest result by Bilal and Kanik, actually in their results, the social cost of carbon, the cost of emitting 1 ton of CO2, when we take into consideration these new measures of the impact, it could be $1,000, which is relevant. Why? Because now, if we think about that the cost that emitting 1 ton of CO2, the economic cost is $1,000, then, and this cost actually could be a lower bound, then simply from a pure cost-benefit analysis, it pays off to invest and reduce and mitigate all emissions. Okay, so let me just. So this is a very relevant. So a very relevant topic that it's happening, a very relevant discussion that it's happening right now. Let me just finish with something that it's maybe unrelated, but it gives also an optimistic view of what we can do about climate change. And this is actually a graph that reflects what was the expectations in 2010. Maybe I can point here. So in 2010, what were the expectations that what was called the business as usual, basically what we would expect if we did nothing in 2010, nothing about to mitigate the effects of climate change, basically. So, and the expectation was that, well, we would end up between around 5 degrees. And that was being talked. When I remember when I was in 2010 working on these issues, everybody talked by the end of the century we had 5 degrees. So what happened since 2010? Basically what happened was the Paris Agreement. And that, what has happened is that the new business as usual, so what's the expectation if the only thing we do is to follow with the current policies we have right now, is that we will have an increase in temperature of around 3 degrees, which is still too high. But we have managed to reduce 2 degrees in 10 years. If countries even do more than what they are doing now, and they do what they have promised, these are the pledges and targets of the Paris Agreement, we could be able to reduce even 1 more degree, and we are still far from the 1.5 degrees that it's what we think is feasible, the lowest feasible, with the debate about the 1.5 degrees, the lowest feasible. We are still far from there, but well, you can see this as the half full glass or the half empty glass. So we have managed to reduce in 10 years 2 degrees. We know that it's easier to reduce emissions early on, and the more we move into reducing emissions, the harder it is. But That's the, I want to locate myself in the half full glass. Okay.
Thank you, Humbert. It's time to record.
All right, you hear me? Okay, sorry, Humbert, but we'll have a lot of disagreement, which I think is good for a debate, right? First of all, I want to point out that, as unfortunately most economists do, you didn't even mention tipping points, which is at the core of the debate, right? And I wish it was science fiction, but it's not. It's talking about 3 degrees. I mean, there's no such a thing as a civilization like ours surviving to, probably not to more than 2 degrees from the Industrial Revolution. So I'm going to talk about ecological collapse in a different kind of context to try to put the perspective from what we have learned about from climate science. And again, I mean, we should make another debate some other day. But I mean, GDP, of course, yeah, fine. I understand why you use it, but not everything is GDP. One of the reasons that we should be worried, I mean, my talk is not like, hey, we should be worried, nothing that can be done at all, but we should be worried. And one of the things that a lot of people doesn't know is, why are we talking all the time about 1.5 degrees or 2? Is this some arbitrary decision that was made by someone? It is not. It is not. Climate science shows very clearly that if we go through these 2 extra degrees from the Industrial Revolution, it's going to be a runaway effect. So the planet will just go into a different state. And I can tell, not a nice state where essentially our civilization cannot not only thrive, it's going to be decaying. I remember 30 years ago, and I want to point out also because, I mean, I'm talking about the science of climate change. And there's been a lot of prediction. And sometimes, not you, but some economists all say, well, you know, climate models, you know, are not reliable, blah, blah, blah. 30 years ago, almost, I remember this meeting at the Santa Fe Institute where this guy talking about what are kind of the basic general predictions we can make about the climate of the planet at the beginning of the next century, right? And there was a list, quite kind of precise, like mega fires in Australia and California, huge floods in Central Europe, and so on and so forth. Even myself, I was kind of thinking, well, this sounds like it's a lot of forecast, but it turns out that this is just happening. And actually, the thing that is kind of more worried, and I'm going to mention this, is that climate change models and also in ecology have been pointed into the direction of trying to predict how things are going to happen. And yes, there are failures, and the main failure is that things are happening faster. I put here these pictures about extreme events because that's the other side of the problem, that we tend to think in averages, well, the average temperature, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is that we cannot face a planet where huge extreme events are happening. And this year has been particularly interesting because all over the planet, extreme events have happened, not just here and there, like kind of anecdotal stuff. I put these 2 pictures from some years ago already, at the same time of the year, where extreme events, minus 50 degrees in the north of the United States, extreme events of plus 50 degrees in Australia, and this is just going on, all right? There are more things that had to do with tipping points. The one I mentioned about 2 degrees as a critical value that we should not cross, right? It's not such a thing like 3 degrees, 4 degrees, where we'll have, we'll put the air conditioning higher, right? It's not such a thing. And one other thing that is a warning is that because of the high temperatures and the problems that are we observing quite clearly in the north and south poles, that melting is accelerating very quickly. Also, again, adding phenomena that we didn't know about. One prediction that was from more than 30 or 40 years ago, maybe, is that is one potential breakdown of the ocean circulation, right? Which would mean that essentially the northern hemisphere will get essentially an ice age, right? Sounds like this is kind of science fiction stuff, right? Well, it happened many times in the past. And the problem is very, very well followed by researchers. The data are quite clear. And yes, this ocean circulation is decelerating, right? And so let me tell you a story, because sometimes also it seems like, well, tipping points, right? How much can you say about that? What can be done maybe to revert them? And just to point one example that is kind of canonical in our area. It was a study by Martin Scheffer there in the picture, one of the, could say, the father of these tipping point ideas in ecology, and he received the Margalev Prize last year. They did the following. They observed there's something that happened in Europe, these shallow lakes that receive a lot of nitrogen as phosphorus from us, the nice humans, and they switch from crystalline and nice into eutrophic. So you have this algae that overpopulate the system. Usually this implies anoxia and decay of diversity, etc., etc. They were studying this phenomenon, and they, using a mathematical model at the beginning, they concluded that by observing the biology, there was something crucial there, that there was large fish that could thrive. They eat the zooplankton in a more aggressive way, and the phytoplankton, which was very much favored by the phosphorus, could switch the system into a different state. And then they concluded, if we were able to remove the large fish, we will put the system upside down to use the tipping point in the other direction. So there was a mathematical model. They tried in a fish tank, right? It worked. Then they convinced the mayor of some village who had one of these lakes, I guess a mayor that didn't thought much about the potential implications of anything. And they did the experiment using fish nets. They removed the large fish, and what happened? Guess what? The lake turned out into the crystalline state, and that experiment has been repeated over and over again. All right? So, tipping points exist in multiple scales, and there's the problem of the time window. We tend to hear these stories about at the end of the century. Well, beware that the end of the century is a long trip till there, and many things are going on already, and we see them happening. In this paper we did with my colleague in Princeton, Simon Levin, we tried to put together, it's a special issue, the problem that we kind of labeled with this title, Ecological Complexity in the Biosphere, the next 30 years, right? It's not an arbitrary choice. The next 30 years are absolutely essential, because there's no such a thing as things are going to happen more or less continuously here and there, and they are not happening already. Let's take coral reefs. Remember this book I read kind of 20 years ago, talking about what happens if you increase 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, until 6 degrees. And they say you increase 1 degree, 1 extra degree, and about 2050, because you warm the oceans, coral reefs will be halved, right? We'll observe only half. Well, unfortunately, that already happened, right? The sea, which is thanks to the oceans, which take a lot of our crap and maintain the biosphere. Okay, I mean, corals are vanishing, right? Don't happen with the rainforest. Again, we could say, well, the Amazon is very large. It is, but the deforestation is going on. I mean, this seems to be something that although there are changes in the government policies, I mean, there are other forces that are more strong. And it's also this kind of prediction that in 30 years, if things go business as usual, as usually said, it will cross also a tipping point, and essentially we'll observe the Amazonian rainforest becoming a savanna, right? Which might seem, well, okay, a savanna, that's not so bad. Well, not good for the climate. That's going to have a lot of consequences, and so on and so forth. There's a number of examples that can be given. I'm going to explain something that I do as part of my research, which has to do with tipping points in drylands. And the example is good, not just because I'm working on it, but because it's especially relevant, not so well known. When you ask people about ecosystems, you usually think in rainforests because they're so cool, right? Drylands, which doesn't mean the Sahara Desert, it means places where you have this vegetation. There's a lot of possibilities here, living in a water-stressed climate, right? That usually persists as patchy vegetation. So it's not something to plant crops or to see lushing trees, but it's about 30% of ecosystems in the planet, increasing. It's going to be 40% at the middle of this century, and a third of the human population lives there, right? So it's not like a irrelevant thing. They are very interesting for many reasons. And one of the predictions of the models, which I show here in this diagram, where you have a graph which in the horizontal axis will be aridity, how stressful it's becoming the system because you have less rain. And in the vertical axis, how much vegetation you observe, right? So you see this curve that goes down, 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 and then all of a sudden it's interrupted. So you jump into a state which in some places of the world in the past is a desert state, right? This is essentially irreversible. And that's another thing that is very important when we think in the economic picture, because that means the assessment of risk, if you don't consider that, you're talking about a totally different story, right? Once you are there, what can be done? Maybe nothing. And I'll give you the example that is here, what the Chinese did in a little part of China, in a desert that was covering the rails of the trains. Of course, was a problem, and they decided to intervene, right? It was this part of a dryland that was just sand. So because in China you can do that, I guess, they engineered a whole stripe of kilometer squares you don't see that maybe that well in the picture, but they built this chessboard bringing thousands of tons of dry vegetation from other places, putting there so that the sand can start to stop just moving around. And by making a really big effort in this little piece of the land, they were able to revert the situation. Because to revert the tipping point, you have to really invest a lot of energy, even for that small system. And they became again a dryland, right? So the implications are important, because if you actually look at different places in the world and you kind of try to see what's going to happen if climate keeps working as it works, for example, in this part of Africa, in the south part, you look in Google Earth, you will see that there's a very big amount of surface covered by something that looks like sand dunes. But they are not sand dunes, they are freeze by vegetation. So it's like the shape, but it's a semi-arid ecosystem. The problem is if you increase temperature, and that has to do with the properties of plants, right? Plants are not robots. I mean, they have limits into their capacity to, become able to move hydraulic forces. This could be converted into a desert with sand dunes moving, right? I mean, the size of the catastrophe here, the humanitarian problem, it's difficult to imagine. So what can be done? What can be done? Well, there's a lot of things. I cannot talk about all of them. That has to be discussed in the past. Let me say before I keep going that what I'm going to propose is not that a techno fix. We make a technological fix somehow, and we will solve the problem, right? which again is something that some of your colleagues tend to say, that somehow science will work out, right? I don't know how, but is that the case? Well, geoengineering is one of the things that has been proposed, but I was saying, I don't believe that just technology is going to save us, right? We have to do a lot of things. Change, for example, the way we go with the economy of growth. Geoengineering proposes strategies that are based on intervening essentially on the temperature and try to, for example, one of the projects is a real project, right? You make millions of small satellites with mirrors, and you locate in the right place, so you can make colder part of the surface of the land, right? Which of course doesn't solve the problem of CO2, right? But there are things that are there. Who knows if they can work or not? Then it's all the nonsense that has been proposed by some, say, visionaries. Let's say, okay, let's just spill off the planet and go to Mars, right? I would recommend him to go to Mars, really. But beyond the joke, right? One of the problems is that misinformation has been acting really against all the actions that we have been able to make. So my proposal about drylands, but it can be extended in other places, and that's work of my lab. One of the nice things is that when you propose some new idea, it was 9 years ago the first time, is that the literature is here. Essentially, it's our work, right? Which can sound like nice, but we'll have more people involved, and this is happening. And the idea is, what if? It's an intervention scenario, right? What if drylands can collapse? And unfortunately, we have this window, right? This window that says that we will be in trouble in some few decades. So what about intervention, which means that I do genetic engineering about something that is in the system, right? And I do that. I make this be able to disperse into the ecosystem level, right? And there's a number of issues here, and I know what you're thinking, of course. You're thinking, and I saw some of your faces. You're thinking, wow, what about Jurassic Park, right? What about you try to control a system, you try to engineer, and then everything gets wrong. Okay? Well, I try to show you that this is not the case. It's not standard engineering. It has nothing to do with that, right? And is inspired in some ideas that come from synthetic biology, which, if you don't know about, it's kind of the next generation of genetic engineering, right? Which is happening in this century. And the idea is engineering microorganisms in particular to actually try to create new things. In biomedical research, of course, this is kind of a leading thing. This is an example that I think it's nice. It's about, imagine you have concrete cracks, which is an important infrastructure problem. You build concrete, which is one of the most, in terms of the impact of the Anthropocene, is one of the most important materials that we are living there. And the cracks are inevitable. So somebody thought, what if I engineer a bacterium that I can put inside the cracks? That is nice. It's a nice environment for this bacterium, and that this bacterium creates a heteropolymer, and then also synthesizes calcium carbonate, and this makes a very strong thing, and they grow, and they fill the crack, right? One of the nice things of this idea is that if you engineer that the right way, right, you can end up into bacteria that are nicely thriving there, but as soon as they are outside, it's like these white mice we have using in the lab, right? Leave it in the field. You see what's going to happen, right? It's just unviable, right? So this is what they call this work and die. It's like a North Korean motto, right? It's you do the thing, you die. So it's a safe mechanism to do that. Well, we've been working over the years in synthetic biology in different problems. And then at some point, working on ecology, working on synthetic biology, it was inevitable to go into this question. Could we do that to prevent ecological systems, drylands in particular, to fall into tipping points, right? We had united forces with Fernando Maestre, who is not suspicious of being a theoretician. He's a field ecologist, probably one of the most important ones in the world, in drylands. We face the problem that this is a multi-scale problem. In biology, this is one important issue. How do you extract information from the lower level and predict what's going to happen in the upper scale? That's not trivial. And I put Nuria Conde here, which is the person who runs our synthetic biology web lab. Quite extraordinary person. She is a biologist and computer scientist. And this is this kind of people that has a PCR machine at home that she built, and also a humanoid robot that follows you. It's very disconcerting. Anyways, so before I go into what we propose, let me say that we done also our homework to identify, looking at large-scale data. This is a science paper that came out a few years ago. Drylands from different places, kind of make a forecast about what parts of the drylands that we have on the global scale are in danger of experimenting different kinds of transitions, because this guides our research. So I'm going to skip the details of that. And let me go for the idea. I'm presenting the idea very directly. Over these years, we've been working on this essentially using mathematical and computer models. Why is that? Because we hate to do experiments? No, because it's nice when people say, hey, multidisciplinarity, etc. But then you try to get a grant into this kind of controversial stuff and multidisciplinary, and you don't get money anywhere. But it's a good ending. Huh? Just wait. So the idea for us was, imagine I have this dryland, which again, believe it or not, is extremely interesting, rainforest dynamics level of biodiversity. And you do the following. You take a bacterium, cyanobacterium, for example, that is already in the community. That's very important, because we need to take something that has been co-evolving with everyone else, right? That contains a number of things. We engineer, which means that we add, let's say, best case scenario, we add a gene that allows this modified bacterium to secrete a polymer that increases a little bit water retention. Little bit sounds a little, right? Not very important. But ecological systems amplify these kind of things, right? And by exploiting cooperative loops, we showed mathematically, using different models, that you can actually show that the tipping point might be displaced, right? So we gain time, at least, or even change, right? That this abrupt tipping point may be smoothed out, okay? So I'm not going to go into all the details, but a very important point, Jurassic Park, right, is, but you put this bacterium there, what's going to happen with the rest? Are you going to have extinction cascades? What's usually said the unintended consequences? No. It's very good reasons for why. We did a lot of mathematical work with my student, Victor Maul, showing that with the intervention I mentioned, you keep that. And why it works? Because we don't do standard engineering. We don't pretend to modify the system and say, this and this is going to change as I wish. No, the trick is biodiversity, and that's very well known in biology, is a firewall against invaders, is an indication of health of the system. So what we want to do is to do an intervention that improves something of the quality of the resources, but keeps biodiversity. Then, if you keep biodiversity, everything else will work, right? But this is an emergent property. We're not trying to trickle with that. All right? Well, we did that different versions. Just want to point out, you could make the argument that, well, you use a mathematical model, but maybe you use some other model might not work. No, we did a lot with our homework. We explored different kinds of versions of that. We also further explored the problems with field data on this PNAS paper that I strongly recommend. Very interesting. What can I say? And there's a number of different paths that we can follow. For example, that's one intervention, but there are other possibilities that we are kind of also starting to look at. There are beautiful connections that have been kind of unexpected, because you could say, and it's a good argument, and some of my ecologist colleagues raised the point, we have only one biosphere, right? So you do experiments with that. Do you have other parallel experiments that can be equivalent? The nice thing is that you have all this explosion of studies on the microbiomes, right? Microbiomes themselves are kind of complex ecosystems, right? In many ways, ecological systems as we know. And there's a lot of research going on because the microbiome, in particular the gut microbiome, the more we know, the more clear is that these functionalities in the gut microbiome impact disease, and that we can intervene because we can restore the stability of the microbiome, and we find out that there are actually connections that are very interesting and essentially have the same philosophy, right? Intervention at the level of single species. So I'm almost finished. The good news is that we've been working hard for years, hoping to do experiments at some point. And a couple of years ago, EMBL, the European Molecular Biology Lab, not suspicious to be kind of a systems kind of level thing, decided to go into what they call planetary biology, so mapping whole microbiomes and ecological scales to try to gain understanding of a number of issues we don't understand yet well. And we were very lucky because James Sharp, who is EMBL in the PRBD, knew about our project, which is called Synterra, synthetic terraformation, and told the director of EMBL, Edith Hare. She liked it a lot. So she used our project as a flagship for the whole idea, and eventually they funded 2 postdocs and experiments, right? So we are happy like kids because now we started to do finally our experiments. This is in our mesocosm facility. Now the cyanobacteria that we are cultivating, and we'll see what happens, of course, because biology, the real biology and the models, you never know if this is going to work. In any ways, I think that the point, because we're talking about engineering, this is uncharted territory. We don't know exactly how things will unfold, but we do think, along with sustainability practices, deep changes in the way the economy is run, right? I think a very important, sincerely, I think very important issue here is that over and over again, when I go to meetings where there are economists, there are sociologists, this is avoidance of even talking about tipping points, something that is really worrying. And nevertheless, what do we want? Do we want to save the planet and save us? Because this is no disconnection here. And I think it's important to understand that protecting biodiversity in particular, which again is not usually in the basic equations that economists are considering, is not something that is just, for me as a biologist, I mean, it's important, preserving biodiversity, but biodiversity offers what is called ecological services that are invaluable. I mean, if we remove that, we essentially remove us from the equation also. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ricard. I think that we have time to questions. I want to remember that people on the online can write the questions, and people on the floor too. So we open the debate. Do you have here?
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to begin the questions. We have seen 3 sides: ecology, economy, and
In ecology again?
I wouldn't say that this is a theoretical ecology, let's say. Now I'm going to say something, and I'd like you to have your comments. So climate change, at the very end, happens as something induced by humans, but the way humans have induced that is by letting the Earth to be more at equilibrium, in the sense that lots of carbon that is underneath is going liberated again. So we are trying to make the Earth more normal and not hide the CO2 in carbohydrates. And at the very end, when all this carbon was in the atmosphere, it was another Earth, another way of living on the Earth. The point would be, could we say that at the very end, the ecosystems will do their job? And for us now, the only real problem is economy and the way humans are going to have a given level of life?
So let me show you that we agree more than you think. Huh?
I don't think so, but
no.
okay.
Huh? So I think that the problem is speed. So the problem is that the process is going to happen very fast, and neither humans nor the rest of the planet will have the time to adapt and to adjust to it. So if we had millions of years, I, as an economist, I would not be worried about it. Except for the things about tipping points. That's something that it's a complete change. But again, the tipping point, the main, I think, and you may correct me, but I think the main problem of the tipping point is that it's a sudden change in the system. So it's this speed that worries us. At least that's my view, and we have proof, and I think life and ecology biologists know much better than I do, has been able to thrive in very extreme conditions. But how we move from one point to the other, it can be very costly, very traumatic in many dimensions, not only the economic one.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, okay, I wait.
well, you put the things in a context I never heard, saying that because we exploited, if I understood, we exploited fossil fuels, we push the system to a more equilibrium kind of state. That's a very, very bizarre position. Yeah, unfortunately, it's because we do it in a way that is not recycling anything. So that's the big issue. But I will be careful in saying, I know you guys don't want to say that, but when you say that, ecosystems kind of rearrange themselves to the new environmental conditions, that's correct. But let's be careful, because we are saying is at the cost of a huge humanitarian catastrophe. We'll have a different. Why not biological?
True.
Both. I mean,
not more than 60 million years ago with the climate change.
But again, I mean, if we go to the Devonian climate, very high CO2, okay, maybe some humans survive in caves, right? Is that what we want? The thing is that we are in the position, because we should be considered a smart species, to intervene in the system, and it's still avoidable. That's not science fiction. We reduce emissions seriously, but we also need to change how the way the industry manages the economy, because of course the policy is limited. We can change that, but if not, I mean, I have two kids. I don't think that, okay, I mean, if there are strange mammals thriving in lakes somewhere else in 100 years, okay, not okay for me. I mean, that's the point, and I think we agree about that.
Yeah, and I would add from an ecologist point of view that, okay, yeah, I think that I agree with you. The problems we have, the humanity, the humans have the big problem. But also we are transforming the ecosystems. And we will have ecosystems, but we will have novel ecosystems with different functions and ecosystem services. So at the point that we don't know what is the future that we expect with the biodiversity that we will have. So I think that it's easy to say, no, the species remains, no, the ecosystems are resilient, because I said we have a lot of evidence, but we are transforming so at a speed up range, no, that we are changing the functions, and the functions, the functioning of the ecosystems are key for us also. So I think that it's a really complex way that, the existing tipping points, but we don't know how, because I think that we know that the tipping points, the regime shifts, for example, that Ricard explained, there is a lot of evidence in the scientific literature, but we know that there are a lot of systems like coral reefs that they grow so slowly that probably we cross also the tipping points, but we don't see it. So there are a lot of things that we don't know today, and we have to be careful about this.
Thank you, that was all very fascinating. A thought experiment. Imagine you three, as you're sitting there, would be advising an existing world government. You have not been speaking about one particular thing that I'm always thinking about, namely population growth. According to current estimates, population growth in the world will plateau around 2050, around, I don't know, 9, 10 billion, something like that, right? I've heard this like since I was a child. Of course, if one would tell all people now to immediately stop getting new children, that would have massive economic effects as well. And what would you, as advisors of this fictional world government, tell that world government what would be the right policy with respect to population growth? Because it seems to me that population growth is one of the most important factors and one of the things that I think is at least theoretically easy to intervene with massive effects.
If I can say something, I mean, in the paper I mentioned before about the next 30 years, we also address, and there's particular contributions on that. I mean, demography is something that is, of course, one of the big troubles we have. We are overexploiting the planet, and we will add, even if we have this decrease in growth rate, we'll have an extra billion people at the half of the century, which is a lot. It's really a lot. I mean, of course, we cannot intervene. I don't know what you're thinking about, but intervention is a very tricky word. I think that you have to face that this demographic increase is going to happen. The thing is, what's only the quality of life of people. And one of the things that, it's just an example of the many things that people have been thinking about, is about our impact on the climate that has an impact on resources that we need to use, which is almost half of the food that is being produced is wasted, which this has a huge impact on climate, right? So it's not like saying you have to change your way of life, etc., etc. It is a very, very reasonable thing that we should change already, right?
Well, I think it's an ethical issue. So it's an ethical issue that we have to decide. And the problem with population, if you think it as a policy, is that where is this population growing? It's mostly in countries with that are with low levels of income. So we should wonder, or we should think, what is the right of developed countries to tell the policy to these other countries. So it's really, I don't think there is a right policy that can be dictated or implemented or suggested in this case.
If I may, I know about the ethical problem. What I was asking for was if there is an economic sweet spot, so to speak, between reducing the increase of world population and having excessively negative economic effects of such a policy. Then you could still tell, you can't forget about my thought experiment, and could still advise United Nations to have a program, that tells people that it would be advisable to slow things down a little bit to that degree. And then national governments could follow suit or not.
So I don't think it could be, so slowing population would not be could not be problematic from an economic perspective whenever, it's depending on what you do with the borders. So we are thinking about global. No? This is a global problem, it's a global issue. So if we stop growing population, well, we will have the population we have right now. With the population we have right now, we can keep, if you only care about the economy, you could keep growing. And you could keep growing if you grow in the right decisions, with the right decisions, following the right path. You could be growing without having to affect the climate. Even though growing, it's not, and it should not be the ultimate goal. But if you only focus on the economy, we don't need more people. It's true that if now you confine yourself, this is connected, for example, with I suppose, with the case of China, that has stopped, and they have started trying to foster again the idea of growing, but that's because they are confining themselves to say, I want people who are born in China. There are enough people in terms of, from a pure economic perspective, there are enough people in the world to do all the necessary manufacturing and services and all things we need.
Thank you. Very interesting and very optimistic, actually.
And that was the purpose. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the extraordinary presentations. It's difficult to compare the different angles, but I'm trying to do that. I think that from the eco-social perspective, one solution is degrowth. Change the way to produce and change the way to consume. Maybe my question for both or for three is, for example, in the biogenetic experiments, or do you include the growth perspective? For example, if you make an experiment that is very fantastic, but the people doesn't change the way to consume it, maybe it's not enough that experiment. And maybe from the perspective of the economic, do you include in the measure the growth perspective, or in the climate change is necessary to measure the increase? Because I think the basic idea that we cannot increase in a planet with limit biophysical conditions. So maybe the question is, it maybe is in abstract, but do you include the growth perspective in your disciplines? Thank you.
So growth, degrowth, it's a different story. Here I was talking about measuring damages. So whether we have to grow, we have to degrow, that depends on what's the objective we want to get. That means better, higher well-being, higher levels of well-being. So whether in order to achieve higher levels of well-being, we need to grow or we need to degrow, that depends on how we go and how we degrow. It's not clear, at least with the data, that degrowing will reduce the emissions. I mean, the facts we have had during crisis, the latest, the COVID, the impact is really small, and the amount of degrowth that we will have to do could be very, very, very large. The whole point of the presentation was to say that even if we don't take into consideration tipping points, even if we don't take into consideration non-economic impacts, even if we don't take that in consideration many aspects that we should take in consideration and they are relevant, now if we manage, so if economists manage to convince themselves and prove that in this reduced context, the impacts, the cost of climate change are so high, then we will be able, and there is a chance that politicians and other economies will be convinced that investing in projects like Ricardo's project, it's worth doing because it pays off, even in the narrowest of all the contexts. Then you can include, this is just a lower bound, then you can include many other things. And of course the cost will be higher. But until now, the arguments we were using is that the costs were not high enough. And that was something that concerned many economists like myself.
Yeah, I will pretty much agree.
I'll tell you.
Okay. Well,
not on everything.
not in everything, of course. But since you mentioned that, and that I get just as an anecdotal thing, but I think it's also a kind of a fingerprint of some things in relation with economy, science, etc. As you can imagine, I have been given this kind of talk many times. And a few times, people from companies approached me after the talk because they thought that maybe we can make business, right? Of course, as soon as they realize that this is not to change the drylands into crops that you can cultivate and make soya beans, so whatever it is, they are not interested. Okay? Not interested in investing in that. Just saying.
I would add this. This is the problem of the restoration. We are in the decade of this restoration, and it seems that interventions have to use as we can do more that we are doing. So for the enterprise, no, they are using these interventions like, okay, I have the opportunity to grow more, and it's not. No, it's not. It's because we have to stop. I think that we need the growth. Science ecological point of view, because 1 degree, 2 degrees is causing the mass bleaching coral events at global scale. So we are in troubles now. So we have to do something. Interventions is really nice, but I would say, how do you know that you could intervene without the stressors that cause these tipping points? No, because no, if you intervene, you need to know it's a restoration point, primary issue that the mitigation of the stressors are acting. So no, this is.
Yeah, and I will also to add, as I was saying, that intervention. We present one scenario that we think that it could work, and we have been thinking in other ways of doing that. But it's the whole. I mean, in the soul of the idea comes from restoration ecology, right? You can, if you know about ecosystems, you can actually do something that is then reinforced by the ecosystem itself, right? And then there's economic value. Yeah. If you forget for a moment about diversity, etc., which is something that we care about, there's all this ecosystem service. When you put the numbers there, I mean, losing a dryland, which you could say, well, it's not crops, but losing a dryland has a huge economic implications. So I think that's one of the domains where we need to have more dialogue, right?
And we need long-term
yeah, definitely.
To understand
which
all
is,
and to gain.
Which is the problem with politicians, of course.
Okay, I think it's time to close the session. Thank you to all of you to be here, and thank you to the speakers.
Thank you.
Yeah.